Welcome to another informal talk with Dr. Nelson Bolmash on your health and well-being. Dr. Bolmash talks candidly on the topics we humans most need, from cancer to weight loss, from sports injuries to acne, and every topic in between, because health matters. And now, here's Dr. Bolmash.
Given time of the year, and now that it's late winter and we're approaching spring, people are starting to ask the question, how do I prepare my body so that I can look and feel like I want to look and feel during the warm summer months of the year when we begin to shed our clothes and show people more of who we really are from a physical perspective? And this really is a very good question and a question that tends to lend itself to rather lengthy discussions. Many doctors have many different ways of handling this. I tend to be more moderated. That is, I don't believe in extremes of either offering to people diets that are purely protein rich or going to the opposite end, which are vegan or vegetarian in nature. I find that protein is very, very important, and it really, in many ways, is key to finding the energy, finding the health, finding the weight level, and the ability to function and perform like one wants. I think at the extreme of vegetarianism and veganism, along with the raw foodists, they have a tendency to eat excess amounts of sugar and often, over the years, tend to have very, very high body fat percentages. For example, some years ago, I did a rather simple research project with a friend of mine that was a practicing raw foodist and vegan. And I indicated to her that there were certain fundamental problems with this way of eating, and she initially disagreed with me, and then I decided let's do an interesting little study where we do bioimpedance tests on people that maintain various diets. And most of the people that were seeing her were either vegetarians or vegans, many of which were also raw foodists, and we found that the average body fat percentage of women from 45 to 60 years of age ranged from 40% to 60%. So I'm not a big fan of eating with a vegan format or even a vegetarian. I'm a big fan of looking at one's life and finding out what one's needs are. For example, some years ago, I got into an interesting predicament. I had a patient come in that was a very, very sharp young woman, 28 years of age, from Russia. She had a PhD in biochemistry, and she wanted to be a raw foodist, and she wanted to be a vegan. And she was very disgruntled, very irascible when she came in, very, very argumentative with me. And we had quite a disagreement because I was suggesting that given where she lived, that what was imperative for her to look and to feel and to function like she wanted was to make sure that she was eating consistently with how the last 5 to 10 generations of her people ate. And she really didn't want to hear that because they ate a great deal of pig, and specifically during the cold weather months of the year, she ate heavy amounts of lard on whole grain wheat bread. And she thought, according to everything that she knew and everything that she'd heard over the last years, that this was a very problematic way to live. So what I did was I sent her to a now world-renowned gentleman, a friend of mine by the name of Steve Halterwanger, who sat her down, immediately identified from what part of Russia she was from, and began to speak to her. And Steve has a very, very wonderful way, very charming way of kind of getting through the armor. And he sat her down and he said to her, let me ask you this, how have your people lived for the last 5 to 10 generations? And she said, oh, they've lived very, very well. They've lived usually into their 80s and 90s. And he said, well, that's interesting. And she said, why is that? And he said, well, because this is how they typically eat. And he indicated that they ate a lot of root vegetables, they ate whole wheat with heavy amounts of lard, sometimes half an inch thick during the cold weather months of the year, and then they ate chickens and pork and so forth. And she didn't find that appealing. And he said, I'll tell you what, how about you call the oldest living person in your village, if you will, or in your family, and you find out how they've eaten, how your people have eaten, and you do everything you can to get the cleanest version of that. And you begin to eat that way for the next 21 days, and then you come in and see me. Well, this woman, when she came in, initially had a severe acne problem. Her hair was falling out. Literally, you could grab her hair and pull it out at an amazing level. I mean, she would have been bald had much more time gone by. She was losing hair that rapidly. And She was emaciated. She looked like she was 6 weeks out of Auschwitz. She looked absolutely terrible. She was pasty. She was pale. She had dark circles under her eyes. Well, what she did is she had some conversations with people from back home in Russia, and she asked the questions that Dr. Haltenwanger asked her to, and she decided to go back and eat like the people from the villages in the Russian mountains that she lived. And in 21 days, her hair had stopped falling out, her eyes were shiny, her skin was beautiful. She only had a few scars left from her acne ordeal. She had put on 12 pounds of body weight. She looked gorgeous. Her personality was different, as in like a transformation of Dr. Jekyll to Dr. Hyde, so to speak. In other words, she'd shifted back from a monster, very irascible young woman, to a very sweet, pleasant, charming woman. So her whole personality transformed. And she said, it's interesting because all I've heard about these last years is how important it is to have almost no animal protein and to have higher amounts of vegetable matter. And she said, basically I'm eating potatoes and carrots and chicken and pork and so forth, and I feel better than I have in many, many years. So the moral of the story is there really is no specific way. There's no one way that everybody should eat. You'd never put an Inuit on a vegetarian diet. You'd never put a Buddhist monk on an all-protein diet. So one of the best pieces of information I could give you if you're stumbling and unsure with all the gurus that have their various opinions about how to eat currently is go back, study where your lineage comes from, find out who your people were, how they lived, get the cleanest versions that you can of how they lived. That is before they were adulterated. For example, if you're black and your people came from various parts of Africa, then find out what kind of meats they ate, and you may not be able to get antelope or zebra or giraffe, for example, or water buffalo, but you can eat the cleanest versions of the mammalian species that we have, for example, here in the United States, and eat as cleanly and consistently in that way as your people did. And I think that you'll find that your health improves dramatically. Thank you. This is Dr. Nelson Bulmash.
You've been listening to Dr. Nelson Bulmash, Principal of Health Matters in Alpharetta, Georgia. You can learn more about Health Matters by visiting health-matters.net or connecting with us on Facebook. Keyword Health Matters.